All right, so welcome to Lifting the Iceberg, everybody. This is the first video edition of LTI. I'm sitting here with media theorist Raphael Zaki.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, we're going to have an interesting conversation. I had the idea to do this podcast, start to film in, do video interviews, and we were hanging out a few weeks ago, and you had mentioned that you're working on a manifesto.
That's right.
A manifesto called On Money, Mankind, and the Cosmos. So this is an excuse for us to get together, to talk about your manifesto, to lift the iceberg on it, and for me to iron out this whole video podcasting thing. So
yeah.
I think that we're just kind of going to explore the subjects that you're most interested in right now.
Cool.
And kind of think out loud about these subjects that I think we're both thinking deeply about. So on money, mankind, and the cosmos. That's a really interesting intersection. And the one that doesn't fit as much as the others is money. You know, mankind and the cosmos. Who are we? Where are we? How do we understand reality? But what does money have to do with that? What does economy have to do with being part of mankind in this cosmos?
Yeah. I think, and thank you so much for, opening up the space to invite these ideas. I think we'll have our own ideas. I hope we invite folks along to have their own ideas and to share that, I think, in the spirit of thinking out loud. I think you always wind up in new places. So I might have my own ideas about what this manifesto should be called or is about. But I think I'm open enough to learn a little bit about where do these things intersect. We could think of it in the micro of our daily lives and our daily habits. What do we spend our life energy pursuing, and how much of that is really things we've set into automatic, assumptions that we've made about how to prioritize our time and how to value or how to create value, how to value ourselves, and
how to measure value.
How to measure value. And maybe that's a part of what money is. I mean, we've agreed that it's one way to measure the value and to facilitate exchange between individuals. And what does that have to do with mankind and the cosmos? It's funny, when I wrote these three down, money, mankind, and the cosmos, they were just kind of like disparate, separate ideas that might have some interweaving threads, but like you said, are really kind of standalone and unrelated. I mean, mankind and the cosmos, okay, maybe that's a little more, a little bit closer of a connection. And when I wrote them down, Samantha actually said, Cosmos money. Oh, I really like Cosmos money. And I was like, well, I didn't quite write it down like that. And she was like, yeah, because then everyone can use it. It's like universal money. It's Cosmos money. So now I'm playing with that, and that's like just happened overnight. And so I'm thinking a little bit about, well, Cosmos money. I mean, it makes me think of Chapel of Sacred Mirrors as well. It makes me think of Cosm money.
Cosm coins.
Cosm coins. I think, part of...
Will you bring the mic up to your mouth?
Oh, yeah,
cool.
Thank you. Part of how we organize the fruits of our labors and how we prioritize where to put our energy has a lot to do with a very root chakra or security and survival incentive. And we spend a lot of time wondering, how can we establish a foundational shelter? And how can we build enough safety to then blossom into who we are
and insulate ourselves from nature? That's something Doug Rushkoff talks about. It seems like we want enough money to get air conditioning in our houses, to be able to afford red-eye flights and take melatonin so we can sleep when we get there,
defeating all of our cycles,
defeating all the cycles, and kind of using this accumulation of value and resources to insulate ourselves from nature and perhaps move into worlds of our own imagination. But it doesn't seem like that. It seems that like money is a symbol system that we've all agreed on, and it's so ubiquitous for all of us throughout. We were born with the US dollar, and it still exists today. So it's always there. We don't really question it, and we don't question we don't question its biases. It is, the kind of behaviors it incentivizes or not. So And I know you think deeply about economics in this way because
Sure.
you've studied with Douglas Rushkoff.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about your background with economics and digital economics through that kind of lens that you've learned by following Rushkoff's work?
Yeah, I think that might be the only way I could learn economics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he talks about it, you know, in the way that, you know, he's really a theater guy,
Mm-hmm.
performing ideas that are hopefully beating out worse ideas, old ideas that were established a long time ago for very particular reasons. And he's invited this meme, so to speak, into the popular culture about where money, as we think of it, might come from. And he points to the monarchs of the medieval ages and says, you know, really what they were doing, you know, kings and royalty who are just essentially born into wealth without actually creating any new or additional value, tried to lock down that existing position in time. Like, how can we maintain our monopoly on wealth? And it had more to do with gaming the system. So you can only use coin of the realm, you know, given by the king's treasury, and you have to pay interest back to the monarchs.
And in that way, you're always a player of the game, not a programmer of the game. And I have a book right here that I've been reading a lot before we did this podcast. It's Program or Be Programmed by Douglas Rushkoff. And I love this idea that money and currency is a thing that can be programmed. It's not something we just have to take from this top-down authority where there is the U.S. government who gets their money from the Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation, and we just kind of buy into this board game that the central banks have set up, you know? And that's why, you know, I hear people give critiques of capitalism, and I think that there's a certain lack of language in arguments like this, because I think that capitalism can mean corporate capitalism, but also sometimes it can just mean free enterprise.
Sure.
And I think that there's a gigantic difference between corporate capitalism and a free enterprise, free market economy. And I think we get those two things conflated sometimes. When I critique capitalism, I'm critiquing corporate capitalism. And that's something Rushkoff talks about. It's like, it's these corporations, it's the central bank that is kind of pumping out these symbols that we call US dollars that are designed to modify our behaviors in ways that keep the system playing in favor for the power elite. And that is a very Marxist interpretation of the problem. And a lot of people are ready to just throw Marxism out. But though I think there is flaws in distilling things down into the oppressor-oppressed narrative, there is just objectively systems in place, like the US dollar, like the currency that we're all forced to use, that is very top down, and we're just kind of, it's a game we're being forced to play.
Right.
You know, so how did we get here? How come we're trading our time for money, our precious time? The American dream is to work for 40 years in a job that you may or may not like, so you can accumulate enough wealth, like squirrels digging acorns into the earth, and pack it away so you can like live into old age without having to lift a finger, so you can waste away in peace. How did we get to this narrative, and how come we all accept money like it's something just necessary? Like there's no alternative.
I think that's part of the challenge is, you know, when something is so ubiquitous, it's like it's in the air we breathe, and we can't see it. It's like a fish in water, right? So I think it's our job as, you know, media literate, you know, whatever, tech interested folks to think like programmers, to think like designers, where you can think a little bit about money as a medium, which is kind of you know, what media theorists or a media theory lens on money would invite. If you think of money as a medium, the first thing you'll know is its inventedness, right? Because now you're starting to think of it like another technology, like the smartphone or the television. So the moment that you think of the television, you think of the folks who invented television or the television medium. You don't often think of money as the folks who invented money and the medium of money, which is, even more, dematerialized as it's becoming counters on, a screen ultimately. So you've got the opportunity in a media frame to think of money as something that's been invented, not just something that grew out of the ground like a tree.
Yeah.
And there's different cycles in nature. You brought up the cyclical nature of things. Well, money has an embedded bias. You talk a little bit about what is it favoring, what is it discouraging. That's another media lens.
What kind of behaviors does money as we have it now encourage?
So I guess we'll start laying out little definitions. So we'll call it centralized currency. You could call it bank debt. You can call it fiat money, right? It has value by fiat, just by pronouncing, by waving a magic wand that this now has value. So centralized currency has one bias that it favors is hoarding. Because the more that you can hoard, and interest has a lot to do with this. That's why there's interesting folks like Sylvia Gesso out of in the 1890s was kind of encouraging this idea of a negative interest rate. It's giving money a property of nature, that it's entropic, that money doesn't just sit there and grow in value forever. Nothing in nature does that. You don't have a tree that just grows forever in perpetuity, or a planet, or even a population, right? That can spell disaster. So there is a homeostasis. There is a kind of balanced design principle that maybe we can learn from nature.
But and it's funny, we use the word currency. You want currency to be a current. And the way we have money right now, it does kind of incentivize hoarding, where corporations would rather make $10 once than $1 10 times.
Sure.
Because every time you have to spend money to make another dollar, you have to let go of that money. And that makes us feel very insecure. Whatever money we have, we want to kind of accumulate it, like armor between us and nature. So what are some examples of an alternative currency or type of economy that has ever existed throughout history where money was used in a more regenerative way?
Yeah. So the work of I think he's a Belgian author and researcher, Bernard Liché. He writes a lot about, we might think of decentralized crypto economics as like the most cutting edge, the leading edge when it comes to alternative currencies. But alternative currencies and decentralization really go back to going local. I mean, going local is the analog mechanism for decentralization. It's bringing economies down to a human scale, allows the players in that game to have essentially to have control, to have autonomy over the lands that the actual places in which they have inhabit, right? So the first thing that Bernard Liché points out is the negative interest rate, or the demurrage currencies of ancient Egypt and of the Central Middle Ages, which are two historical epochs which showed immense amounts of growth and prosperity, because you had this essentially this bias designed into the money where when you first earned it, let's say you have $1, it's worth 100 grams of grain. The moment that you earn that dollar for the grain, it's starting to depreciate in value because the grain is going to spoil, it's going to get lost to insects. So you have an incentive to spend that money when it's at its highest value, which keeps things circulating. If you want to think of it as an ecosystem, or even like circulatory system in the body, you're getting good blood flow, you're getting oxygen. So everyone in the ecosystem is getting enriched by the oxygen of the flow of money, rather than the mine hoarding, very, how can I build a wall, around my money and just pile it up and stockpile it up, rather than how can we activate it essentially as a facilitator of exchange? So more like a poker chip, more like the values in the exchange, and it's in the behavior. So,
and what I think people forget that money is a means to get wealth, not the wealth itself. and we need to start looking at money like that. It's not about how much value or how many zeros you have in your bank account. It's about your localized network and how you're creating value amongst in a very peer-to-peer way.
I think if we do have the opportunity because of digital media to do these extremely granular local experiments in alternative economics, let's say, if you want to call it that, it could just be actual economics or better economics.
Yeah.
It's not that life should be designed around some amount of value production or consumption. This is just following the kind of the necessity, the need for facilitating exchange, for growth, for innovation. What is that need driven by? Is it the myth of progress? Is it something, we must strive towards some perfection of the human ideal?
Do something to get something, that a very Western idea. Yeah. Now, an example that I think we should just talk about quickly in terms of corporate capitalism and how money and this style of economy can be very extractive is the story of Walmart. Walmart will go into small towns and become the place where it's cheaper to buy everything at Walmart than it is to buy at any other store. So it closes out all the stores. So everyone who needs to buy anything has to shop at Walmart, and because all the stores are closing, all the jobs are going away. So the only place you can buy things is Walmart, and the only place you can work is Walmart. And that happens for a few years until the town goes bankrupt and Walmart closes, pivots to another location, and then goes through that same cycle again. It's kind of this scorch and burn style of economics where that seems so counterproductive to what our money should be doing, to what economy should be doing. Yeah. We need almost a permaculture of economics where businesses help raise up and the current of money helps raise up the areas where it's being used, not just extract value out of them. So how did we get to this extractive business model in so many of our corporations?
Yeah, Douglas does a great job in Life Inc. and Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus to talk a little bit about kind of the industrial revolution. And people talk about the digital revolution as the fourth industrial revolution or whatever. So he says when you've devalued the craft, when you've devalued, let's say, the labor of a human being, and you've turned it into essentially a commodity, what you're doing in an assembly line is you're making it so that the pieces of the value creation equation are easily replaceable. So you just have to teach one guy to bang one nail into a shoe, let's say, rather than value the art and the craft of whatever, I'm sure there's a fancy term for making shoes, a cobbler, a peach cobbler.
Yeah.
Now, what is it called?
I don't know.
But ultimately, you've found human beings becoming cogs in the machine of capital.
Human resources, human
labor. I mean, and it's not really that we have to. It's not that we have to do it differently. We're here in this time in history because we're choosing to look at the alternatives. But this can just keep going on. And it seems like, this thing is just going to be run off its tracks. It's like, hey, let's not look at the fact that we're about to just run this thing off a cliff.
Yeah.
So we don't have to change it.
Yeah. Yeah. Something like something that's brought up a lot is, what Walmart is doing in terms of automation is they're getting rid of so many jobs. And this is a problem. Like, where are all our jobs going? They're taking our jobs. And the thing is, like something Doug Rushkoff says is, who wants a job?
Right.
No one wants a job. People want to create the things that they find meaningful. Yeah. They want to move into more like craft-based works so often. So we're so kind of attached to this idea of needing to have a job, and I guess that's a good way to pivot into to bring up the idea of universal basic income. How do you see the idea of universal basic income factoring in to the situation we're in economically.
Yeah, I mean it's great. It's great to get, something for nothing, and
but it's a way of kind of bringing more current into the kind of macro scale of the economy, because and it is redistribution, and people get very scared of socialism for good reason. But what if there was a mechanism in place that put more current in our currency?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, there's enough critiques of universal basic income to think of it as, well, like you said, it's either going to be, we're just taking from the rich and then redistributing it. So, we don't want that. We don't want you using this money to stoke the flames of economic progress or whatever. Okay, that's one argument. Or you can look at it as, well, what is it really doing? It's giving people money to keep the engines of this kind of economy going when many people don't have it. So it's almost like, hey, use this to keep the game going, rather than this is actually going to help. It's kind of it is a Band-Aid solution, and it's certainly I don't think that Andrew Yang is making the proposition that this is what's going to change everything.
The end all be all solution. But in terms of how fast automation is happening, it's almost like the best, most simple solution.
It's one solution, and it maybe, it's the one that
keeps the same game going, and that's kind of like the idea. And you're giving people more monopoly money that is created by a system that
you don't need to rely on. And it's really because of decentralized media. That's one of the biggest value adds of the crypto craze, is that, hey, we don't need third parties. We could exchange value peer-to-peer, without the need to rely on a centralized bank or a third party to say, you are Tyler Berger, you are a trustworthy person, you do have $200, here you go. It's like we could just do that. We could just do that directly. And we're in, the 0.0 phase of this opportunity. It's just who's going to lock down, like the monarchs did in the 13th century, the next set of assumptions that's going to become the driving narrative or the driving principle for why you get up every day and punch in at whatever job you do. And there are essential services. Like, I don't think anyone wants to throw out the fire department, So there are, and there's different ways of doing that too. And we see a volunteer model and police and fire departments having a massive ripple effects through the community. We talk about community policing or, community mutual aid groups. That's what alternative economies really suggest, is how can we amplify networks through time banking, through what's called LETS systems or local exchange trading systems. It's how can we amplify the support network of mutual aid to get the things we may not need a market for. So if we need a market, maybe we need it to create, really cool technology and iPhones and, podcast recording equipment and stuff, but maybe we don't need it for elder care or child care. Maybe we don't need it for basic education, and who knows, but we fear one another, and there's a lot there too. So to rely on one another for mutual aid is a really, especially at this time in history, is like, there's social media does a great job showing how we're different rather than building any connections between us,
For sure. And so what do you think of the idea of a centralized federal currency? Like you talk about the idea of bringing economy into a more local analog type distance from the individual. But I don't see how we can have local currencies, say, in each city without there needing to be some kind of other higher level currency that connects all those other currencies. So what do you think of the idea of our federal centralized currency, and do you see any alternatives?
So Bernard Lichia talks about these as yin and yang currencies, and he kind of goes into the archetype of our economics essentially, and he talks about what gold is good for. He calls it a good long distance currency. So when you're talking about some kind of unifying standard measure of value, that's the value in paper money. That's the value in gold, is that, it's worth what it is here and it's worth the same there. All right, fantastic. And there might be cool, weird, local currencies, but maybe there's just local networks and then long distance currency. I mean, we could think of this in a lot of different ways. It's like thinking of gamification. I think some of the people at the leading edge of this are folks working with rewards points. Like they're trying to figure out, how do we use blockchain to use this alternative currency for rewards points, which is encouraging new behaviors. So go get your gas at Exxon instead of whatever, and you get 25 points for every dollar or whatever. You realize how they're implementing this ability to change behaviors to encourage alternative ways of gaining value points, and then cashing them in for actual stuff like a flight to Mexico or whatever. So that's what these alternative networks can do, is gamify, and it doesn't matter what the medium is. This can all be digital, and people talk about it as mutual credit, right? So I can go 3 credits into the red, and you can go 3 credits into the positive before maintaining a zero balance. And it's not about how can I hoard my mutual aid credits, it's how can I stay at zero. So it begins to encourage different kinds of behaviors, especially as they're tied to your day-to-day living and your day-to-day survival. The truth is that, and I feel like you have to talk about that. There are gaps and there are challenges, and there's a reason why the hegemony and then the standardization of a monopoly currency has been the predominant game. And that's because there are skills gaps in mutual aid networks. Maybe we can do babysitting hours, but where am I going to get my electricity from, and where am I going to get my food from? And so there are real challenges.
Yeah, you can't just have a bunch of different silos of talent. Like, I think it's really fascinating how I can spend all of my working time. I'm working for myself in certain ways with different creative projects that I have, but my main gig is I teach parkour and gymnastics. And it's such a blessing to me that I can spend my working hours teaching parkour and gymnastics, and that's giving me currency that is allowing me to pay my rent and buy food and buy things for my arts, just like this podcast mic.
Of course.
I can do one action and get a type of currency that can pay for everything else in my life. I don't need to teach parkour to someone so they can then give me a steak, which then I can trade for
like a direct
day.
barter, of course.
Yeah.
And if they don't have what you need, then what are you,
So
who else are you going to find?
So there's always kind of a need for a currency whose value we all agree upon. Yeah. So another way I want to kind of pivot this, and this kind of goes into humankind, or mankind rather, is one of my favorite books is by a psychoanalyst named Erich Fromm, and he wrote a book called To Have or To Be, and he says that he was a student of Marx and kind of has that kind of bent, which I think is very appropriate in certain aspects. And he said that the human condition can be distilled to a having mode of being and a being mode of being, where you can define your self-esteem and your sense of self by what you have. I am because I consume. But Erich Fromm said, if I am what I have and then I lose what I have, what then am I? So just having and possessing no longer becomes a valid way of sourcing your self-esteem and your security as a person. It's about who you are in the present moment and how you operate between these different game systems, rather than the accumulated layers you've managed to clothe yourselves in while playing these games. So how do we, I know you haven't read that book, but how do we move from a having mode of being to a being mode of being?
Sure. So why not bring up Socrates? All right. So in a lot of Plato's work, he talks about the good And one of the things he defines as the good is something that can't be easily taken away from you. So like the good can't just be, massive amounts of wealth, which sounds good.
But it can
but
be
is
taken away.
Is it the good?
Yeah.
It can easily be taken away from you through no fault of your own. And so so how real is that? How versus the virtue of self-discipline. I mean, that's something that's hard.
Exactly.
You earn that in a hard way, and then you keep it. No one could just take your discipline away.
Being disciplined is a type of wealth that is so much better than $1 million in the bank, because there's that other idea of that David Deida wrote in The Way of the Superior Man. It's not that you want to have this wealth, but you want to be the person who can create that wealth. So it's kind of like shifting the perspective of like, it's not about what you have, it's about who you are. And if who you are is, I don't know what you would say, proper or healthy or well adjusted, then the more extrinsic factors of wealth don't matter as much.
Sure.
'Cause that's not, and you're bringing up stoicism, really.
Yeah.
The idea that, we should focus on those things that can't be taken away from us to develop ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we talk about value. I think we really value those things. I think we value those things in one another. I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about like at least be disciplined enough to carry your own burden. Maybe you can reach for, helping, but at least don't be a burden to others is a phenomenal gift that you can give yourself and others.
Yeah.
And what does it cost you really, other than self-reliance? And what does that have to do? That has more to do with like habits and intention and self-awareness. And it's often the case that our economic paradigm keeps us jumping from one foot to another enough to not really ever engage meaningfully with those aspects of ourselves. We drone out, stamping out repetitive, monotonous tasks, not all of us, but many of us in a lot of what we might call a job economy, find a living doing things that we probably rather wouldn't do, and doing it at the very highest levels and doing it very well, right? So what does that do? I think that what it does is it conflicts you as a human being. I think that you're talking about, you said a certain amount of like wellness or integration, but how integrated as a human being do you feel to be able to bring yourself to the task of life? How do you feel? Do you feel conflicted in the different goals that you've set for yourself, and how society might be if things were really good, and we got rid of all the bad things and all the bad guys, and and we hold up these ideals for ourselves. And you're talking about it in a very practical way. I mean, you get a lot of joy from exchanging the value of your labor potential, doing backflips with these little kids, and the smiles and the joy and the laughter that you bring into the lives of these little kids isn't something you can necessarily quantify. Like, how many happiness points did you get from these kids today?
Yeah.
But you could tell me how much you made this week.
Yeah.
And you could quantify it by the hour.
Well, I could talk about how what I'm doing for money is factoring into my well-being.
Yeah.
I forget who exactly said it, but your career lies at the intersection of your passions and the world's needs. So the idea is to find the craft that you're passionate about and try to engage in that craft in such a way that fills a gap in the world.
Yeah.
And that's how you create value. And that's kind of what I'm doing, which is I'm so grateful that I have a job I love. It keeps me happy and healthy, like physiologically healthy, because I enjoy my job, I believe. And that, I feel, is what so many people lack. So many people go to a job that they hate, so then doing nothing becomes their ideal. It's like I just spent 8 hours working as a call center worker.
Sure.
Now I just want to go home and I want to sit and I want to just watch TV and just passively consume, because that's kind of what doing what I'm not passionate about leads me into wanting to do.
Yeah, I think that's inertia too. I mean, there's something tugging on you on the other end of your responsibilities that makes that such a soft, fluffy track to just slip into, and it just goes in automatic and it just keeps going. So is there something
we lose
better?
Something. We lose something when we get it, when we become a cog in the machine.
Sure.
You know, and that brings us to mankind. What ideas are you trying to distill and funnel into that subject in your manifesto?
Yeah.
What's important to you when it comes to the subject of mankind?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, what you're talking about in a lot of ways is, are there better games that we can play? You know, do I want to drone on each day, you know, relatively in autopilot, or do I want to engage meaningfully with my surroundings and think of, you know, think of my value as beyond something that should be measured, quantified, and fed back to me as a status symbol, whether it's my salary or the things I've acquired or how I look on Instagram or any of these things that are tugging at our nervous system and pulling us into more mindless and habituated patterns of being, doing, and feeling even, you know, getting outraged because you're engaging with an algorithm that's meant to probe you. You know, are there better games than an economy that's been set in automatic for us to engage with a gamified world of screens that's basically the equivalent of a Las Vegas casino? Look at the flashing lights here and this banner ad there, and don't you want to click buy on those sneakers, and it's going to follow you that same color and pattern and style and brand until you finally click buy. It's
we need to find a game. We need to find a game that is more human.
Yeah. And so that, you know, I think that's something that Douglas goes deep on in Team Human to identify, like, what is that then? What are the more human than non-human, non-animate, you know, anti-human type agendas that are playing themselves out in humanity and across humanity? And he talks about the quirky nooks and crannies. He talks about awe and these and paradox as things that we could begin to retrieve and value truly and integrate into an economy that must grow or that must produce something. And in a lot of ways, he's asking for us to soften this mandate that's like really self-imposed and is ultimately counterproductive. So the mankind component, I mean, you know, it's really what you've described, a certain sense of integration within ourselves and our surroundings, so that we can, you know, play out this human game. You know, there's a story that's been written for you, so you can easily slide into a consumer profile or a psychographic profile so that we can manipulate you. But how often do these algorithms like stop to ask you, you know, Tyler, do you feel safe and at peace right now? Because I would argue that you couldn't engage meaningfully with other human beings until you felt safe and at peace. And in a precarious economic environment where, you know, your status is your salary, your access is determined by your value potential as deemed by an economy, which might not value other things. And the question is, why not? You know, why are those things left out of the market equation? So the way we rationalize is by saying, you know, don't forget those things. Let's commoditize those too. So ayahuasca tourism, and, you know, let's not forget those indigenous
spiritual marketplace. Yeah.
So, okay. So we're still losing something. What are we losing? I think that's a fun place. That's totally a fun place to just geek out on, because not a lot of people are, I think, other than Douglas, are bringing like critical scrutiny to the weird squishy aspects of human nature.
Yeah, and also with mankind, and when we talk about the economy, we're very much so talking about a construct that we find ourselves embedded in. But we have a nature. Human beings have a nature. In a lot of ways, we are status monkeys. You know, people wanted status since having the shiniest rock or the best club was a status symbol in the caveman days. You know what I mean?
The one with the Nike swoosh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, but I mean, there's a lot of evolutionary psychology behind all this. Like you kind of want to create a peacock feather around yourself and to move up the dominance hierarchy, bucko, and become the top lobster. Sure. Because in a certain way, you need to move up dominance hierarchies in order to be happy. You need to feel like you're moving from point A to point B towards a transcendent North Star. But what happens when the hierarchy that you find yourself in is a social construct that is based off of nefarious practices by corporations and an economic game that is not serving you. So it's like, what is the balance between human nature and the ways in which we as humans navigate reality? And what is the balance between that and the social constructions in which we find ourselves in? Because it seems like it's both. It's both instincts driving us and external abstract constructions that we're in feedback loops with.
Sure. I think, so I just got back from Costa Rica, and I think the way that you get back in touch with nature is you go back to a natural environment. And, there's cycles, and you could get really heady, and melatonin and serotonin, and these things matter, and hormones and peptides and brain science. But just take a deep breath in the jungle. And it's just a different air than Manhattan. It just is. And I don't mean that you can't find places with fresh air, but the places that we go to find work, like like New York City, it's a different vibe, and it's a whole different linear pattern that you're following. And I don't think we're the first to suggest that there should be, more humanizing systems to be engaging with at the level of our day-to-day existence. How do we get food? How do we create meaning? How do we engage meaningfully in our communities? How do we contribute? Whatever, even to our own happiness. It's like we could really go and find play, like a real deep kind of play in the jungle, watching nature do its thing, just catching a family of monkeys up in a tree and just going like I caught a family, like 12 howler monkeys in a tree, and there's some baby monkeys like really close to the other monkeys eating.
Did you take a selfie with the monkeys?
I didn't take a selfie, but I took a picture of the monkeys. Because of course it wouldn't be real unless I did. I couldn't just be there and enjoy it. But there's this one monkey hanging upside down, and he's just eating leaves hanging upside down from his feet. And there's a certain amount of freedom in that, because no one told him to put some clothes on and go, he's going to be late for his 2:00 meeting or any of this. It's just, there's some raw, and you see yourself in that, and I mean, monkeys for sure, but just in nature, you see yourself like, what? This is, there's a slow kind of, thriving. It's a slow thriving. It's this, it's like a good fuel that will burn and last a long time, rather than like jet fuel that's like really impressive and just you burn through it in a second. There's a different kind of like a good espresso might be to the jet fuel. There's a different kind of energy that you feel supported by in the jungle. And I think that helps. I think that it helps to just reconnect with that. I during my first ayahuasca experience in the Amazon, when I did it in Peru, where they are smart enough to have medicines like that legal, I
had an experience where I slid through a tunnel that ended up feeling like the Vine of Souls, like the ayahuasca vine. I felt all these different presences and souls and spirits. And then I'm kind of giving you like a Cliff Notes version of the story, because some of these things are just so complex and go in so many ways. But at the end of my vision, I appeared naked in front of a proboscis monkey, a monkey that always seemed very wise to me. And this monkey had like kind of those little nerd candy sized monkey heads popping out of its pores, a monkey head of every single species of monkey. So I knew that even though this spirit was manifesting itself as a proboscis monkey, it was just a placeholder for the monkey spirit. And I was kind of like in front of this monkey, making eye contact with it. And in that moment, the shaman stood up in the Maloka, walked over to me, and started like hitting me on the head with the shakapa, which is like this, it's a tree branch. So he's hitting me with a bundle of leaves, and the sensation of the leaves kind of comes over my whole body, and I feel like I'm in the trees with this monkey. And the monkey says to me, but not with words, but through a vibe, it says, "Who are you to me?" And in that moment, my social security number didn't matter. My bank account didn't matter. My job didn't matter. It was, if a monkey sees you in the jungle, who are you to it? Yeah. And I felt it was such a pre-language experience that I don't have a net of words to put around exactly what I vibed to that monkey, but it was something like, I'm a healthy young male who is connected to nature and animality. You know, I felt, I guess that's how I could feel that vibe. And I felt a particular momentum, or even the concept of true will, which we're going to get to in a second, manifested in that moment, confronting that monkey. And I felt like that's when I got in touch with my true will, my true self, the self that exists underneath the clothing of our culture. And I think that's what we need to get back to. That's what happens when you take a deep breath in a waterfall in Costa Rica. You feel the nature of your organism, you know, not the cultural clothing that you are constantly wearing to play these status games, to play what Timothy Leary called game activities, you know? So how do we... let's just go right into the true will subject, because you introduced me to a person named Jason Louv, who is an occult magician and philosopher, and he talks about the idea in magic of the true will. The true will is not to get that Lambo or like do the whole Dan Bilzerian thing. The true will is something...
It could be his true will.
Yeah, it could be his true will for sure, but not... you don't want to compare yourself to that as if that's like somewhere where is an ideal place to end up, perhaps. How do you understand the idea of true will, particularly through the lens of magic?
Yeah. I mean, I even heard Jordan Peterson talking about something along the lines of, you know, abiding in truth. So like, you know, you could look at the word and just go, okay, there's the word true and there's the word will, right? And so let's look at true, you know, true. We kind of touched on this in a previous engagement, but there's this idea of authenticity. I would say authenticity is true. Now, feeling authentically oneself and feeling authenticity is, I think, it's an opportunity to engage with what is true.
Because truth does appear to you as a physiological response. You know, you feel integrated or you feel disintegrated. You feel in truth or feel out of truth. You feel it in your body. and you want to kind of constantly be in the state where you're feeling that truth. And it's almost like your true will is not your most optimal 5-year plan. Your true will is being in that place where you are, and sometimes when you're there, when synchronicities start to happen.
Oh yeah.
Like that's good when we can kind of get into the idea of the cosmos, because I feel like synchronicity is the way in which the universe winks at you and tells you that you're going in the right direction. You are in alignment with your true will is the language I would use to kind of cubbyhole that sensation, that phenomenon of being a human. It's like, you can be in truth, and then things start to fall in place. So how do you contact your true will?
I did want to just mention the word will as well,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we talked about true.
Yeah.
It is a feeling, like you said. And so if it's true, then we've kind of talked a little bit about how we could sense and engage with that. The will component has more to do, I just feel like, will feels like this active force, this like, I don't know, I mean, think of willpower, or think of willpower. It's certainly something that you cultivate, right? Being able to withstand more and more discomfort is an act, let's say in fitness goals or gymnastics goals. It's like pushing yourself to that edge of chaos and developing more and more willpower in that terrain you've yet to map, whether that's doing a perfect back handspring or, sticking that whatever double backflip. It's like you're in that place where will is being called upon. And that's, I think, that's something that you could get out of the monkey mind and just be like, ooh, I feel the will, I feel the determination to engage without flinching. It's true. So, so it's the true will. And you're right. You do get feedback from the cosmos in the sense that it encourages you to move closer and closer to that unmapped territory, and it rewards courage by giving you synchronicities and letting you experience the play, the laughter.
Nature loves courage.
Nature loves courage, and I mean, you're not always feeling brave, right? But you could get in touch with that aspect of yourself that's timeless, that's boundless, that's and there's so many metaphysical speculations we can drone on about.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it in a way of like kind of moving into mystery and into the variables and kind of like mapping that territory. Something that Jordan Peterson, we brought his name up a few times, talks about is how consciousness is the force that creates habitable order out of chaos. And to stand up straight with your shoulders back is to be in a state of ready engagement with chaos, with mystery, with the uncrunched variables of reality, and being able to map your way through it and constantly updating your map and realizing that, my map is actually working. I have something here. I'm being able to navigate through this reality by how my mind has crunched the variables of chaos. Now I'm in order and I'm safe. I'm insulated from chaos in a healthy way by my ability to create order out of chaos. And that is almost like the kind of fundamental archetype of what it means to be human, to be the thing on the line between yin and yang. It's to live in this balanced way. How do we move more into balance?
Well, we're talking about an economy of the true will.
Yeah.
Well, so what does a true will economy feel like?
By inhabiting the true will and a true will economy.
What does that feel like? Cosmos money. I feel like if we're talking about feeling in balance and feeling engaged, I think that's the opportunity. I think that's the opportunity to unplug from the system and to plug into yourself. And it's not really, not just your individuated self, but your capital S self, that true will component is. It's not somewhere you go with your ego, and it's not somewhere you go alone. It's sitting there ready. It's already happening. It's already all happening. And then we find ourselves, or we may find ourselves curious as to that yearning. What is that feeling? What does it feel what does it feel like to be engaged, to be doing the thing that turns you on the most, that turns you most into yourself? And that sounds so simple that, your whole duty, your whole responsibility navigating your way through the cosmos is to figure out how to most be authentically yourself. So I think a true will economy is one that encourages that and values that, because I mean, think about if competition's gotten us where we are now, which is great, it's like, I'm better than you. Look, I'm going to make a bigger, better plastic thing that's going to wind up in the ocean.
Yeah.
Versus whatever that might look like if we aren't all in fear and aren't all, looking to manifest a safety bunker for the event.
Yeah.
Even when we have more money than God, it's like we're still afraid. And okay.
Yeah.
So
bringing out the true will requires martial arts of the mind, as Jason Louv talks about. And so these martial arts include yoga and meditation and magic. And these are the practices that we can use to sink into our authenticity, to engage with reality in a proper way, where we are creating order out of chaos in a healthy way, in a way that kind of continues to pull us in the direction of our self-chosen North Star, so to speak, our transcendent ideal. What exactly is magic? Because we know what yoga is.
Yeah.
We know what meditation is. Magic, Jason Louv listed as a mental martial art.
Yeah.
How can we use magic to sink into our true will? And what exactly is magic? You mentioned this. I think it was the fifth episode of Lifting the Iceberg you were on.
Yeah.
Will you explain again what is magic and how can we use it to become more authentic?
Yeah. Let me see if I could recall it, because it is a great... Jason Louv was recently talking about yoga and meditation as kind of the internal arts of perception and consciousness expansion. And he described magic as the external ritualization of will, essentially. And if you think about it, we even call it, we're creatures of habit. So what are habits? They're like mini rituals. So if you want to think about how you're engaging with magic in a very kind of a plain and obvious way, it's what are the rituals that you're casting out daily, and how is that influencing the energy, let's say the energetic atmosphere.
What do you mean rituals?
So even getting
habits.
up,
like getting out of bed,
brushing your teeth, right? So if you wanted to, you can look at brushing your teeth as an absolutely sacred ritual. First thing that you're doing is you're coming to awareness. You're spending 10 minutes, 5 minutes in hypnopompia, right? Or what?
Hypnagogic.
No, but when you're waking up.
Hypnopompic, I think, is when you're waking up. Hypnagogic is when you're about to fall asleep.
So you're in an altered state of mind, pulling in, remnants of dream material and emotional material and memory, and you're in a meditative state. And you rise as you inhabit this, waking state consciousness, and you run the water, the sacred water. That's, you could even show gratitude to the fact that you can have running water in your sacred temple space as you reach for this implement, which is also helping you, keep a bright smile. And so you think about your smile, and the energy of that smile is radiant and it's infectious. And when someone smiles at you, your inclination is to smile back. And there you are looking in the mirror at your smiling self as you're brushing your teeth, and you're changing the pattern of your neuromusculature in your face that's giving you more dopamine and more positive emotions, and your thoughts are kicking up into a whole different, state of being, and you're using ritual behavior and awareness setting to move into new spaces of perception. And in that way, you can actually use your will to create changes in your perception, or you can think of magic as the art and science of creating change in the cosmos using your will. So in that way, we're all magicians.
Magic is a way of, to use John Lilly's words, programming and metaprogramming the human biocomputer. You know, that's I started to understand, well, I was introduced to the idea of magic with a K, by you, and there's a part of my brain that just didn't let me go there. And it was the part of my mind that wears a little lab coat and says that, oh, no, that's not possible, because look at the first, second laws of thermodynamics. Look at things, how things have to be, because we live in a reality that is objectively true outside of us. And though I do agree with that, and it is an important part of my mind, I kind of like, magic works for me when I quiet that little dude in the lab coat in my mind and say to myself, what if anything were possible? What if anything that I could imagine, what if it's possible? What if there are no limits? And that's when magic becomes interesting to me, these magical practices, because to understand magic and to utilize magic means to play around with the fundamental presuppositions of your psyche, you know, which is the bedrock of it's the bedrock, your presuppositions, your axioms,
Your filters.
Your filters. But then you need to understand that those presuppositions, as supported and validated by your culture and science as it may be, they are reality tunnels. They are still presuppositions. They are still just angles from which you are perceiving quote unquote reality. And that isn't as firm a foundation as we might think. So this kind of gets us into the idea of reality tunnels. I know someone I'm sure you're going to manifest in your work is the work of Robert Anton Wilson, who talks about reality tunnels. So do we live in a cosmos that we all share, or do we live in separate silos of reality tunnels, or what is the disparity between my reality tunnel, your reality tunnel, and the reality that we both share?
Wow. I feel like I've had a lot of like different emotions and ideas as you were riffing. So I've like been flipping pages in my head, and now we're at this question. So I want to bring all of that into it. Let's see. Well, yeah. Are we living in the same reality tunnel? Probably not, right? Are we living in the same reality? For sure. I mean, like we talked a little bit about nature's the thing that kills you. You know, nature's the thing that if you don't
pay attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It like we need traffic signals and crosswalks, and we could agree that, you know, public spaces tend to be publicly accessed by you know, individual carnate human beings, you know. But are we all having the same experience of that space? And I feel like in the kind of spirit of that question is, how could we think of inviting the idea of the economy into that same? Are we all having the same experience of economic activity, or whatever that might be, economic access? How could we throw that up into the air and say, you know, if anything were if anything I imagine was possible, how could we fix this? That I think that's, I mean, there are no rules. Like you're in this boundless space of, it's great that we all have our own imprints and reality filters that we're bringing to the problem of existence, because then we can have another perspective and we can have another idea. And it doesn't need to be fixed by the parameters of whatever we've deemed to be shared rules for engaging in space-time.
Sometimes we need to break open the doors of perception and kind of like shatter everything, every way in which we would otherwise perceive reality and expand it to kind of include as many variables as possible, which is a very lofty thing to do because you can't spend every day in that type of consciousness.
No way.
But when you blast open the doors of perception, you can kind of crunch new variables and see new ways of organizing the hierarchy. You know, that's the role of the artist, I think, in society, to imagine new hierarchies, to imagine new systems, to imagine new realities. That's what artists literally do, in my perspective. They imagine new realities taken from an opened perception experience, which it's called an altered state of consciousness, whether it be through psychedelics or meditation or yoga or some kind of visionary experience brought on by holotropic breathing. You go into these altered states of consciousness and you pull back from it and reintegrate certain things that you were too blind to see before in your previous reality tunnel, and you bring them back and you create a new vision of what could be. What question is begged from that reality? How do we get there?
Yeah.
How can we all become artists that are co-scripting a reality that works for everyone?
Yeah, I feel like, in early proponents of the internet thought of the ability for all of us to do this and, share all of our different perspectives and all of our stories is a way of influencing that. It's a way of at least inviting that potential in a radical way, in a way where, it really could be something you speak into being and then inhabit, and the internet has this potential still, I think. I mean, at least in terms of connecting people. The times that I've been able myself to get out of my own way enough to engage with that true self component of reality, and then to engage meaningfully within the relationships that I have out in the real world, is when I get out of my own way. It's when I stop telling myself the story of who I am and what brought me to this moment, and that's not easy. It's really scary. It's really uncomfortable territory. It's chaos. What story is going to win? What story can, and is it just going to be the story with the most shiny lights around it? Or have we been so mesmerized by spectacle that it's all representation and it's all perception? So, the Trumpian reality is a reality TV reality, one that more of us are inhabiting, where our internal reference points are mediatized. Everything is like, oh yeah, I saw that on Facebook, Instagram. It's like, what about just seeing it? What about, is it real? Are things real outside of that context? And so many of us are choosing to avoid engaging with reality because this is so much more in our control. It's so much more comfortable. And it sounds like the way to growth is really to marinate in that discomfort, to marinate in, and I mean, dude, we can talk about the problems of the world that we must sit and feel the discomfort of, so that we would, it would lift the complacency of our own patterns, so that we can change the way reality is. I mean, it sounds great.
What problems are we not paying enough attention to?
You can decide to meditate on any aspect of, like, your iPhone. You can hold your iPhone and you could feel the slaves who put it together. It's up to you. And if you get bothered enough, it'll either throw you into some kind of PTSD loop where you're like, I can't do anything and I can't engage with the real world because everything's evil, and there's no purity, there's no humanity left. That's a hard one, but I'm sure we'd do something about it if we felt it.
Yeah. It's about lifting up that cognitive dissonance and perhaps seeing reality as it is, as its affecting. You told me this great story the other week. It's about, maybe I can tell you enough to remind you of it, and you can tell it. There's a guy with a fence around his house, and he's throwing trash over the fence.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And that story was great just because of the way our reality tunnel can be so insulated from the reality of others, you know, from the reality of the people who built the iPhone that we're filming this with.
Yeah.
It seems like there needs to be some kind of connection between those two. Can you tell that story? Do you remember what you mentioned?
Sadly, not exactly.
The guy who's
just
in the
tell it.
There's a guy, he has a house, and it's a beautiful house, beautiful manicured lawn. He's got a white picket fence around his house, and everything's going great within this white picket fence. And whenever there's any kind of waste or trash, just throws it over the fence.
Yeah.
It just continues to throw it over the fence without regard of the environment around him. This is kind of what Douglas Rushkoff says too. It's like, we're gonna bring all our trash to one part of the planet before we realize it's still the same planet. You know,
Your garbage goes somewhere.
Exactly. So we need to, though we have our own reality tunnels where we are using an iPhone with blood metal in it, we might not be paying attention to that because it's inconvenient for our reality tunnel. We need to open that up. And because that's how we all play on Team Human. You know, we need to lift everyone up. And this is another critique that Doug Rushkoff has of the transhumanists and the technologists that say that technology will make humanity so much better, intelligence 2.0. But only for the millionaires who can afford that. You know, it seems like their reality tunnel is not on Team Human. It's on Team Millionaires who can play around with technology that might create superhumans but leave everyone else in the dust.
Which doesn't sound like fun anyway. You know, if that sounds like fun to you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a weird reality tunnel.
Yeah.
And so let's test our assumptions. I mean, that's the cool thing about calling it out, is that you can actually have others try that on for a little bit. Does that seem like a game you want to play? It's exciting. It's interesting.
It might be a game you want to play if your awareness isn't opened in the way that it could be.
Now, a lot of these guys, these billionaire types, are Buddhist, tantric, whatever. You know, meditators and brain neurostimulators, and they're doing it all too. So I feel like they should be wide open doing ayahuasca every. No, who knows? What do you I mean, I think it has to do with power in that way. You know, it is a blinding constraint, and it is something that you wouldn't invite yourself to have less power. Just out of the idea that you should. You know, it's not some, you know, I should have less control over my own schedule. I should have less, you know, whatever. I don't know. Anything that really lends itself closer and closer to just an instant gratification reality. Why would you ever take yourself off that hierarchy? I guess maybe that would be a useful reality tunnel to inhabit, to be able to come up with better solutions.
Perhaps,
because you can understand, maybe you could understand a little more about the fear.
Yeah. And then distribute that knowledge in a way that where everyone else can gain from it too.
In a way, like we said, at least for myself, it's usually when I get out of my own way. So I've got to trick myself, right? So in a way, it's like, if there are, you know, patterns or themes in the narrative of the cultural direction that we're going in, maybe we can trick ourselves. You know, it's kind of like what Rushkoff suggested during the year 2000 disinfo talk. He was like, imagine we were confident enough to let them think they won. Oh, but you won. Yeah. You know, but you won. It's like, that's cool. You know, and maybe we can trick ourselves in time. maybe we can get out of our own way in time.
What other things did you want to, why else did you use the word cosmos in the title of your manifesto? What other kind of subjects are you trying to tie into that word?
Yeah. Cosmos is kind of like a universal term for nature, because we tend to think of nature as like whatever we see on this planet, but Mother Nature, if we want to think of it in those terms, is the nebulas and the Milky Way and all that, because where else would diversity, the kind of biodiversity on the planet Earth occur if it wasn't for the nuclear reactor of the sun and how close we are spinning around in some massive galaxy that's part of some other ecosystem that we have no idea. I mean, it's just because we don't water our stars and they don't grow the way that grass does doesn't mean that that's not Mother Nature in that like very earthly sense of the term. So I feel like there's so much we can learn about ourselves from nature, which includes the extension, which is the cosmos. I definitely was leaning into our relationship to our awareness of the universe. And, we talked a little bit about yoga, meditation, magic. So there's that. And that ineffable mystery, that component of the cosmos that giggles back and that looks at us back. That part is so weird to me that it's like, we've beat out all the fun out of imagination, play, and reality, that we're all living in these boring, dull, very constricting reality tunnels. I feel like there's got to be a better game we can play. So it's like, what better teacher than the cosmos? I feel like there's stars exploding and, nebula nurseries of baby stars and other planets growing on. That's like a weird, fantastic display of life and of play, and I think it's a beautiful metaphor for whatever we could activate in human potential. I mean, people talk about potential. It's a real thing, like imagination. It's a real place. If anything were possible, if I could just imagine it, it could be. But anything that is started in the imagination. So it is that way. It is that fantastic. It is that ineffable mystery. And I feel like finance sucks all of that. Sucks all of that into an equation or an algorithm and goes, and this is why we're valuable. And this is why you get access to central air and a gated community. And this is why, you hold up a carton on the corner.
All for increased profits for the third quarter.
Yeah, you got to get that third quarter benchmark.
Yeah.
If we don't get that milestone, the shareholders and...
Yeah. So the thing that I see that ties these subjects together is how can we play a better game? A game that creates money, that gives value to everyone in a way that is concordant with human nature and in a way that is concordant with the universe, recognizing the cosmos as a force that giggles back.
Yeah.
That's how I would distill kind of the common thread between those subjects.
The smiling economy.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to drop on your manifesto, or anything you feel like we didn't cover?
No, I really appreciate it. I think this was it's not something that I think is fixed. And in a lot of ways, if you look at even Douglas's career, what you see is him spend a lot of time diving deep on an area and then extracting from that this mimetic download that he kind of dovetails into his next piece of work. So somehow he's managed to combine like all these disparate areas of thought, whether it's magic and digital economics and, religion and all of these, and the technology and dystopian futures, and connect them in a way. And for me, I think it's just now I think I know a little bit more about what I think about these topics, because ultimately they found me. It was like, in trying to figure out a little bit more about myself, and how to navigate this, it's like, well, what are the major components? What are the major players here? So yeah, I thank you for inviting me to explore these ideas with you. I definitely have more ideas now.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what you do, is you just keep pushing. You just get that you're not going to land someplace where you go like, and this is the perfect economy for
And
smiles everywhere.
it.
And smiles everywhere all around.
Yeah.
In perpetuity. But this was fun, man. And I think,
Yeah.
As you're launching off the more video podcasts and everything, I wonder where you're going to go with lifting the iceberg. I mean, what about you?
My philosophy behind all this is that action is more important than reason right now. My reasons will delineate themselves as I act. So right now I kind of feel my true will pulling me into having the conversations that I've been having, because it feels like I'm surrounding something that is important.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It has something to do with what it means to be a creative point of consciousness in an otherwise cold universe, and what responsibility comes with that. And you provide a lot of insight with that for me, because you really do have the side of economics and money and how we play these games in a reality that is becoming increasingly technological. So thank you for kind of dropping some knowledge on that, because you're helping me lift the iceberg, whatever that iceberg may be, ultimately the iceberg that transcends all subjects. The metagame, the meta iceberg. What is the meta iceberg? I don't know, but I think maybe we're a little bit closer to it now. So I know you're not on any social media right now, but like, what can people expect from you other than seeing you on this podcast more in the future? Yeah.
Oh, well, that. Yeah. And I need to write. I think that you get further along in your thinking when you know what you think. And so, I'm encouraging myself to work on this manifesto. This is the notebook that it's starting as, but it might be a thing one day.
Nice.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Raphael, thank you for lifting the iceberg.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah, man. And everybody, thank you for listening to the first installment of Lifting the Iceberg video edition. This is just a crazy experiment, and I thank you all for coming along for the ride, whoever made it to this point in our conversation. And definitely look out for more stuff in the future. I'm going to keep playing, and I'm going to keep exploring and keep surrounding that meta iceberg that I think is so important for us to kind of shine a light on and lift. So thanks, everybody. Peace.